recording started first. So welcome and thank you for taking the next 60 minutes to join Idaho Partners for Good today. Our workshops are packed full of practical information and resources to help you stay ahead in the field of nonprofits. The host of the nonprofit series is Idaho Partners for Good. Our mission is to reinvent how people like you and me give, share our expertise, and do greater good together. Our vision is to develop stronger, healthier, better equipped nonprofits so that they can do more of what they do best. We do that by educating donors to give for more impact, providing nonprofits with education, coaching, mentoring, evaluation, accountability, and capacity building expertise. The experts we put in front of you are best in class and are constantly learning, retooling, and innovating to stay ahead of changing times. It's one of the reasons we record these so that you can access best in class information. Today's workshop, last year we heard a lot of stories from both executive directors and board members about their level of anxiety and confusion in regard to leading their organization in a post-pandemic world. What are you to do when operating when the operating environment has changed, donations are down, and your board of directors are left wondering how to help? You learn from experts here in the Nonprofit Success Lab. The Nonprofit Success Lab is a safe place to learn and ask questions in a supportive environment with a host of nonprofit experts to resource you. Today is the final workshop in a 4-part series titled The 3 Key Work Areas of the Board. This week's workshop is focused on building accountable boards. Maureen here has tools to help you explore how board self-assessment can create more efficiency while increasing your board's engagement. Today's learning objective is to help participants reflect on their effectiveness at the individual and group level and identify ways to improve. The other 3 workshops are already on our YouTube channel, and I'll put the link in the chat here in a second. So now a little bit about Maureen. Maureen OʻToole, has a passion for helping people and organizations use their gifts, talents, goals, and strategies to become the best version of themselves. She has 30 years of servant leadership in military service, higher education, elementary education, and youth leadership, for-profit and not-for-profit organization, and she moves easily between the business and nonprofit sectors. She's a former Silver Sage Girl Scout CEO and current member of the Sunrise Rotary Foundation, and so much more. I'm going to turn it over to you, Maureen, and I'll get your presentation up here.
Okay, thank you, Bethany. So today I'm going to tackle something that is on the minds not only of the nonprofit world, but people in the for-profit world. There's a big discussion going on about how do we create accountability in the workspace. So it doesn't matter if it's for-profit or nonprofit. How do we create accountability? So what I did is I always circle back to what is the purpose of a board, what are the roles of the board, and how does this conversation tie into those? So Bethany, if you could go to the next slide. And I will ask that this time, last time I had much more of a conversational as we went through a topic, asking people weigh in, what do you think? This time I'm asking you to hold it to the end because we do have a couple people who need to hop off. And it would be helpful for them to get through just the concept of it and some examples before we field questions. So like Bethany said, we've already talked about what are the 3 roles of the board? What are the 3 big work areas of the board? And then I've tied every subsequent conversation into what are your 3 roles and how do the next conversations tie back to them. So then we discuss what's the difference between the role of the board and the CEO or the executive director? What are respective responsibilities and tasks? And then last week, we took all of those things, what are the respective responsibilities and tasks of the board, and turned them into, what if you could focus your board efforts for a year? And you said, in this board year right here, here's what we understand our roles and responsibilities are. Here's our typical task. What if we focused our effort and had a board level plan for the year? And we executed against that. Just like the organization you support is having their annual plans. What if the board focused their effort? And what would that look like? So today there's a logical follow-up to that when we say, okay, well, you created a board level plan, you understand your roles and responsibilities. How do we as board members hold ourselves accountable for these actions? And it's equally important to have a CEO or an executive director in this conversation because what happens at the board affects them and they want the board to be successful. So I know we've got Devin is the CEO for his organization, and Liberty's the CEO for her organization, and Bill's the president of Bishop Kelly. So their presence here is pretty powerful. How can they help the boards be more effective? So we'll go to the next slide, Bethany. So I always circle back to this. What are the 3 roles of a board? And this comes from McKinsey. And you're going to see one of the tools I talk about later is McKinsey. So if you haven't used McKinsey and Company, it's a great source for board level tools and understanding. But we already talked about what are the three roles. And today we're finishing up. My portion is finishing up with like, how do you monitor and improve performance? So boards think about the organization, but how do boards monitor and improve their own performance? So that's why I'm finishing up here. How do we get better? How do we get better? So the next slide, Bethany. So I always circle back to this too. What is the real purpose of a board? And what does it mean when you say, and we started with this with Blossom, what does it mean when a board says we have fiduciary responsibility? And when you look at those 3 big areas, we're responsibility for managing the organization's assets, act in the best interest of it, and we're bound by legal and ethical obligations. Those are 3 big concepts. And then I kept trying to turn them into what does that actually turn out into? But part of being a board assessment process is including that. Are we effectively helping manage the organization's assets? Are we acting in the best interest of the organization? Are we adhering to our legal and ethical obligations? And I think it was Blossom who was teasing last week and said, well, Maureen memorized all 185 Idaho statutes related to the nonprofit world. But that is one of those things you want to circle back to all the time. Do we understand what our legal and ethical obligations are as a board? Do we know what's out there? Do we know what we need to adhere to? And are we checking ourselves? So board assessment is going to cover these 3 areas if it's done in a holistic way. So on to the next one, Bethany. Okay, so here's the big why question, and you can unmute yourself and answer this question because I'm sure there's going to be lots of different reasons. Why is board level accountability important? And Blossom, you can go ahead and jump in because you work for a board too. Why is board level accountability important?
Your organization can only achieve as much as your board is effective. So in other words, if you don't have a very effective board, then you will never accomplish your mission.
Good. Yep, their effectiveness affects your effectiveness and your ability to do your mission.
Yeah.
What else? Why else would you want to have an accountable board? And I'm going to take it back to Bethany's introduction when she was saying post-pandemic, board members just felt stress and anxiety. So how is creating accountability and using tools to create accountability, how would that help your board with their stress and their anxiety?
Maureen, this is Kimbra.
Hi, Kimbra.
I think you touched on it last week that this gives them purpose and it also helps them know that what they're doing is making a difference.
Exactly. Exactly. So we went over what are your 3 work areas? What would board level plans like? Now you turn around and you go, are we actually doing it? Are we doing well? So board position is an unpaid job. That's what it is. And people want feedback. How are we doing? What could we do better? It's helpful for everybody. And I think somebody wrote in the chat there, it's very helpful to have bumpers. Here's our lane. We're going to stay in our lane. Here's the activities in our lane. And we're going to turn back and look and see how we're doing. So those are all
Maureen.
great. Yeah, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't know if my audio worked. You know what? One thing I've observed coming from the for-profit world to the not-for-profit, both reporting to a not-for-profit board and having served on them for the last 25 years. In the for-profit world, a board is very thoughtfully created to make sure that you have the right skill sets for the corporation to be able to act as a board. Not-for-profits tend to be donors, people that have a passion about the activity. In my case, appointed by pastors. There's not the same process to make sure that you have a board that has all the skill sets that would be desirable. And so I think it's, you know, in not-for-profits, especially important to realize, okay, maybe that's who the board is, but now how do we help them become successful?
Exactly. And I agree with you completely. You get a lot of people who've been appointed, like Catholic Charities of Idaho, they're all appointed by the bishop, or you recruit it out of people in your club if you're in a Rotary club. They may not necessarily have the skills. they have the heart to serve, they want to serve, but they may not necessarily have the skills. So that would be part of like, how do we get better at vetting? But once they're there, how do you help them? How do you help them understand what they're supposed to be doing and evaluate their progress? So that's wonderful input. You're absolutely right on there. So Bethany, we'll go on to the next slide. So I always go back to this. What are their responsibilities? And there's the 3 work areas: protect the organization's assets from misuse of power, prevent conflict of interest, greater transparency. And that last one there, great, Maggie wrote at the bottom, accountability creates ownership and buy-in. And it also, in that last bullet, promotes a higher level of professionalism. So if you have a chance to weigh in and you buy in and you build board level plans and then you turn around and evaluate yourself, you are totally bought in. You understand your role, you understand the power of doing it well. So you're totally bought into what you're doing here. And that will help with board retention, board effectiveness. So we're going to go to the next one. Hi, Sherry. It's very nice to see you. So what are some of the reasons you personally want to build better board accountability? So I'm on a board right now, and I want this small foundation to continue to be incredibly successful. So we've started to put into process like regular meeting schedule, review conflict of interest, some of these activities. But what are other reasons you want your board to be accountable? And Maggie touched on one. You want them to be successful. You want them to weigh in and buy in. Any other reasons you want your board to be accountable? Oh, okay, great, Bethany. We know what we're doing, what we're supposed to be doing, how to do it well. Yeah, so perfect. Oh, I love that. Create a team that likes working together. When you know what you're supposed to be doing, you're executing on it, you get along better. So that's great input. All right, Bethany, we're going to go on to the next one. And this is an important principle, and it sounds a little harsh, but what you allow, you teach. And when you don't set standards for the board and you don't enforce them, you get what you get. You get board members who don't attend meetings, who aren't prepared for meetings, board members who don't give in a meaningful way, board members who don't come to your events, don't serve as ambassadors. So once you establish accountability, says, here's my expectations, and this is what I expect from you. And it's okay if you're not up to this, and then we'll just gently move you off the board, rather than have everybody around you be frustrated that you're not keeping up. So what you allow, you teach. So you turn that statement around, and you teach people, this is what it means to serve on this board in a meaningful way. This is what it means. Yep. Yeah, I agree with you, Sherry. I want to set a good example. And how do I do that? Yep. So then I'm just going to go back to circle back to what we've done the last 2 weeks. So there's all sorts of, I gave you just this big old laundry list in your different areas of work areas. What are your big laundry lists of all the things boards are supposed to be paying attention to and boards are supposed to be doing? So here's just like this, especially when we get to the next one, but I just pulled out 3 from each one because otherwise it feels a little overwhelming. But in your big work area, shape the mission and strategic direction, we want you to every year adopt and regularly review the mission, vision, and value statement. We want boards to actually work with the staff to build a strategic plan. That's a big lift. We want to make sure the board has updated bylaws and make sure their policies are reviewed regularly and that they meet the requirements of the IRS. So those are 3 very specific things. And how do you hold somebody accountable to those in addition to all the other ones? But what I'll show you at the end is some really valuable tools that you can already use. They don't have to create it yourself. They're already out there. So the next area is ensure leadership and resources. And again, I only picked like 3 out of I think there was 15 what we've gone through for the last 2 weeks. Do I serve as an ambassador for the organization? Do I serve on a board committee? Do I make sure the staff has sufficient resources? Those are 3 in that work area that are incredibly important. And the evaluation tools say, are we actually doing it? First, the training says, do I know what it means to be ambassador? But then we say, this is one of your roles. Are you doing it? And because if you're not doing it, like Sherry mentioned, we want you to be effective. We want it to be a good experience. If you don't understand that role, make sure you get some training in it. And I always ask that board level professional development and skill specific training is part of your annual plan. And the last big work area before we go specifically into the tools, the last big work area, Bethany will be on the next slide, is monitor and improve performance. And that's where we're spending our time today. I've just pulled 3 out of that laundry list of things boards are asked to do. Do we have risk management policies? Do we understand what potential risks are, financial risks, risks to personal safety? Do we have activities and policies that address those? Big one here, do we actually annually review the organization's leaders' performance and make recommendations concerning compensation? And a lot of nonprofits don't do that. So that's one of those accountability actions I would always recommend you have in there. Another one, do we review our own performance as a board and identify how to improve it? And I gave Bill Avey's organization a big shout out last week because Bishop Kelly board bylaws actually identified that this is a task for them to do. It's the only time I've actually ever seen that in anybody's bylaws. We commit ourselves to reviewing our performance every single year and how we could get better. So those were just the 3 work areas with three or 4 tasks in each. So that right there, without doing anything else, we just said, wow, here's 9 things we should be assessing. That's why having a tool to do this becomes so powerful. If they're unpaid people, how many hours do they put in already? How do we make this meaningful and effective when we do some kind of assessment? So then I'm going to walk through, the next thing is 4 different accountability tools you could use. What you expect, you inspect. So I spent 26 years in the military, and that was one of our leadership paradigms. What you expect, you inspect. If you ask people to do it, make sure you turn around and evaluate whether or not it got done. So the 4 tools I'm going to show you just different ways to do it and different levels of complexity. There are other easy, simple, shorter tools if you want something smaller, but here's 4 great tools you could use. So Bethany, I'm going to start with oh yes, I'm sorry, when in charge, take charge. I got to ask this question. Who do you think is responsible for ensuring that the board gets onboarding, training, and self-assessment? Who do you think is responsible for that?
It normally falls on the shoulders of the CEO or ED. Ideally, there should be a committee
Oh,
that is in charge of that.
okay, that's very true. It usually falls on the CEO or ED, but the perfect place for it to sit would actually be on a board development committee. And people think in terms of board development as in recruiting board members, but one of the other roles of a board development committee is actual development of the board, creating onboarding for them, professional development, having retreats, giving training, ongoing training for them. Sherry says, me and my team. Theoretically, the board president or chair, whatever their title would be the one who's going to spearhead this effort. The board chair or the board development committee is going to be the group that says, okay, we're going to make sure we have onboarding, make sure we have job descriptions, make sure we have a retreat once a year and look at the bylaws, values, policies, and we're going to make sure we do an assessment. That is where it would logically lie. But reality is it often falls on the CEO or the ED, which is why that partnership between the CEO, ED, president, and or the president of the board or the chair becomes so important. Yep, we can work together to make sure these things happen and everybody wins. So maybe in your organization, you can turn around and identify, do we have a board development committee or not? Can we create one? Or how can we work better as staff and the board to make sure these things are in place? Okay. Next slide, Bethany. So this one I really like. This is a very simple tool, and it's an annual board commitment statement. And you ask people to join your board typically for 2 to 3 years. It's usually 2 to 3 years. 3 is the more common one. But what you do is once a year, you ask them to review their roles and responsibilities in some kind of letter format and sign it and say, I understand what I'm pledging to do over the next year. I understand my role and what I'm going to do over the next year. And it covers the 3 big work areas. So shape mission and strategic direction, ensure leadership and resources, and monitor and improve performance. You make sure the commitment addresses all 3 of those areas. So then I'm just going to pull up samples from a letter I put together in Girl Scouts. So Bethany, the next slide. I put this together in Girl Scouts because we had a board of up to 17 people, and some of them were actually the older girls. They were our high school girls, so we could get their voice and their opinion. And once a year, we would sit down and go through this. So here's what I said I would do. At the beginning of the board year, I sit down and look at it again. And attendance is a big one. If you only have a quarterly board meeting, you want to make sure they attend at least 75%. That's only asking them to attend 3 meetings a year, and that's not an unrealistic expectation. It is a little more difficult. It's more difficult if you have a monthly thing, but once again, you ask them to attend a specific number, a majority number of your meetings. And yes, Maggie, we will have these slides for you and copies of all the tools I'm showing you. And this one, the meaningful participation. I do a lot of work with boards, new board members for onboarding, and then boards that are doing some kind of annual review and professional development. And they aren't sure what the organization's mission is, what the services is, what policies they're supposed to have and programs. So what part of your commitment is they will, number one, have copies of it, but number two, they'll read it and they'll bring it to meetings. So when they go to a meeting, they have a copy of the mission statement, understanding and a description of services, programs. They have the policies required we have. That is an expectation. I've put together board binders that say at a minimum, here's the documents you should have at every single meeting. You should have them, you can flip to them. But I will understand what they are and I'll adhere to them. Make sure they review the agenda in advance. So I'm going to ask this as a question, but you don't need to answer. Is there anybody out there who gets frustrated when you put all the materials ready for a board meeting and you can tell the board didn't read the packet? Board members weren't ready. They didn't know it was on the agenda and they didn't read the packet. Don't need to answer that, but I imagine there's people nodding their head besides me. It's a little frustrating. Little frustrating. So Bethany, we'll move on to the next one. Actively contribute to discussions at meetings. And you can only do that if you're well-versed in the program, the services, the mission, the vision, the values, if you read the agenda and you're prepared, you read the packet, you're ready to go. But we really want board members to actively participate. So actively participate, I show up and I participate in the discussions. I'm helping the organization with responsibilities. I review the organization's financial statement. I learned how to read a financial statement, and I do have to give Maggie a shout out for this one. Maggie really helped me understand all of our financial statements in depth, and then she trained our board on it. So she's a CFO. If you have a really great CFO, that could be part of what you do as part of your board training. Like walk them through each one of those statements so they really understand what they're looking at. And I put the next one in there, represent the organization in a positive manner, because I have experienced board members who behave badly at meetings. They talk over people, they talk around people, they have sidebar conversations, they're checking their text messages, they're looking at their screen. So that might be something you define. How do you actively contribute to discussion? Yes, please look at that. This one is the biggest area of concern. This ties back to the 3 work areas. This one ties back to ensure leadership and resources, actively contribute to fundraising. This is a big deal. This is the #1 fear of board members. They're afraid to participate in fundraising. They're afraid to ask for money. And I just gave Devon's board training session last Tuesday, and I said, here's 4 ways you can step into fundraising, and it's enjoyable and it's very low stress. So #1 is you have to make sure they get training in it, but make sure they're willing to do this. They commit to doing it. First one's pretty important. 100% of your board members make a personal cash annual gift. These are the type things that are invisible. Other donors will be asking if the board do this. Sometimes it shows up in a grant request. Are all of your board members donate to the organization? This information is visible on your Form 990. So you want to make sure that your board members give a meaningful donation in some way. Yes, absolutely true. It's a lot easier to ask someone else for a donation if you're giving yourself. And next one, here's another one. Another thing people are afraid of, ask other people to give to the organization, identify, cultivate, and solicit at least 2 donors. That is as simple as saying, hey, would you like to come to an event we're having? Would you like to come to our annual meeting, something like that? But invite at least 2 people you know to either become members of the organization or donor. And that's just a small ask. Over the course of a year, you talk to people all the time, but you make a commitment. I will talk to at least 2 people by that organization and invite them to be a part of it in some way. Last one, I was just looking at something with Devon yesterday, assist them with a grant opportunity. This one can be very simple. Am I willing to write a letter of support? Sometimes a grant requirement will have requirement for at least 2 letters of support. And I'm on the board. I support this organization. I will personally assist in this effort. And I know with the Murdoch Foundation has an expectation, and they check to make sure your board is involved in this in some way. They actually meet with your board members. They ask for your level of commitment. And the last one, participate in at least one fundraising event. So these are 4 ways you can step into fundraising and make a commitment that are not stressful. They're definitely not too stressful. So Bethany will go on to the next one. Here's the big question for you. So I come to meetings, I read the materials, I participate in a meaningful way. I am willing to participate financially with this organization. I just gave you some things that I would put in a commitment letter. So now I'm open-ended question for you. What else would you like in the commitment statement if you were going to do this simple contract with your board members? What else would you like in it? I can see Bonnie. She looks very, very thoughtful.
Maureen, you kind of covered on this already, but I think I would make it a little more specific
Okay.
on making introductions to the executive director so that that information, their contacts are captured and part of the future contacts in case that board member moves on.
Perfect. Perfect. And then somebody put in the chat, ask them to open doors for you. This is something I do on a regular basis. I'm asking, would you like to meet somebody? So when you're on the board, you have a lot of connections, and that's one of the things hopefully you're being recruited for. Number 1, you have a heart for this, but number 2, you can bring other people to the table. Can I introduce you to a granting organization? Is it a foundation? Is it a charitable organization? Is it a business foundation? Can I open a door for you? I do this one a lot. Would you like to come speak at a Rotary meeting? Would you like to tell us about your program and mission? So I think we have 85 people in my Rotary. We have some real movers and shakers in the community, and I've brought so many speakers to the table. Would you come tell us about what you do? And it opens the door for them to network. It opens the door to be applying for the grants that my foundation supports. But like I did with Liberty before everybody else joined on, I make sure when someone's come to my board and they're really doing a good job that I introduce them to other grant opportunities as well. Did you know that this one's out there? So that door opening is so powerful. Anything else you'd really want your board members to commit to?
At Idaho Partners for Good, we have a commitment to having an entrepreneurial mindset. And so we have kind of like how we show up to our meetings, what's our, like what kind of guides our discussions, and that's really clear to us at the beginning of each meeting. We've got a link to those things. And I think that could be in the annual statement that we accept that we're going to show up to meetings with this mindset.
Great. Great. And another one in nonprofits is have a cultural philanthropy, and just to explain what that is, that we give of our time, talent, and we introduce other people to the organization. And this is a way of being for us. So now I'm going to move on to some pretty well-developed tools that you could use. So this is just an annual commitment letter. This is a pretty straightforward way to get accountability because they're going to bring this to the meeting with them. At the end of the year, did I do this or not? Do I commit to doing it again next year? And the next one are 3 much more structured tools. I love almost everything that McKinsey & Company produces. So this is an extensive tool. It's based on an Excel spreadsheet, and I did send it to Blossom so she can send out the links to all these things, or just I tried to turn them into PDFs or Word documents whenever possible. This is a very extensive tool. It identifies 10 different assessment categories for a board. So I didn't do all of them, but what are they? What is the purpose? What is the purpose of this? So we're going to look at our core responsibilities and make sure we're doing them. I call them the 3 work areas. What are the tasks under the 3 work areas? Those are your core responsibilities. And then we're going to look at the importance of what we're doing for the next couple of years and increases our effectiveness. So that is the purpose of this, the stated purpose of this tool. And then I'm just going to show you a couple different categories of what this tool assesses, and it is free to use. So this first one, board on its core responsibilities. And I've already touched on this one, I think at least 3 times. Do your board members understand the mission? Do you understand the mission of the organization, and can you verbalize it? And we can discuss it with people. Can I say in 30 seconds or less the mission of the organization? Can I do it? Do I know what it is? So are we doing this or not? Do most of our members, they do a scale of 1 to 4. Can most of our board members do it? Yes or no? They do it well? But do I know the mission? Can I verbalize it quickly? Vision is one of the big areas of responsibility under shape, mission, and direction. Board members help us understand the mission, and are we actually executing according to the mission, and we're not getting caught off on little things that are kind of not aligned with our mission. And then do we have a vision? I make vision statements very straightforward. What does success look like? Can the board memorize what success looks like? There's 2 ways to do a vision statement. One is aspirational. If we do this, we will reduce poverty in Idaho. If we do this, we will have less children who go to bed hungry. Those are aspirational statements. And a vision statement that the board helps develop could be much more operational. We are financially sound, we are visible in the community, and we have sustainable and effective operations. 2 different kind of vision statements. Do you know what it is, and can you verbalize it? And then on the second one here, once again, these are core performance things, succession planning. So I'm working with an organization right now that has an executive director who's been there for a long time, over a decade, and is getting ready to retire. So the board is heavily engaged right now in identifying a succession plan. Could it be an internal replacement, or is we going to have to do an external look for talent? What skill sets does this person need? When do we need to bring someone on board? What would the transition period look like? That is a very, very important role for a board. Don't have to do it every year, but when you do it, make sure you understand it. Yeah, so in Idaho Partners for does this as part of their organizational capacity assessment. What is the strength of the organizational leaders? Very important. And the other one boards forget is to do their own succession planning. Are we thinking a couple years down the line? So some organizations will say, your term is 3 years, you can do no more than 2 successive terms, or you can do no more than 4 complete terms on the board. But if you've got someone who did 4 terms and they have all this institutional knowledge, you need to make sure that you're thinking in advance. And when this person steps off, do you have somebody else who's been there long enough to have that institutional knowledge? And the leadership role, it's a big job to be the board president or the board chair. It's a big job. Do you have a ramp up period for somebody coming next? Is your succession plan, the vice president has a 3-year term as a vice president before they step into the president's role? Or same thing with the chair. Does the vice chair have 2 to 3 years of prep time before they step into it? I do know that my Rotary Club does this very well. They do a ramp up of 4 different terms. So you sit and you move your way up the leadership, so you're prepared to take over that leadership role. Do we have a way to think long-term about keeping good talent here? Evaluation development process, when you look at that, are we giving our executive director feedback annually? Are we doing 360-degree evaluations? So those things are just things, if you're doing them, please make sure you evaluate if you're doing them. If you're not doing them, put them on your checklist of things to do. So I think I only got one more on this one, Bethany. Oh, no, this one. So I'll wrap that one up. Like I said, it's got 10 categories. I do send it to you as a document. It's just, you might, if you've never done something like this before, you might say, we're going to take 2 of these 10 categories year 1, and then we'll just start building from there. This is another great tool. And I think I got this one. My cousin is a development director here for a nonprofit, and he just finished earning his certificate as some level of development. And he was in this class in California. He goes, hey, Maureen, look at this tool. It's amazing. So I looked at this one too. This is another one. It's very, very inclusive. Here's all our roles and responsibility. This one isn't a number scale. It's are we doing it? Agree, disagree, strong disagree. I love that it says non-applicable, because sometimes some of the stuff isn't applicable to you. When I look at that very first one, roles and responsibilities are clearly defined and separate from the board of staff. That goes back to our conversation about respective roles of the CEO and the ED. And this also goes back to, do we have job descriptions? Do we have a description of what the board chair is supposed to be doing, the treasurer, the secretary, a member at large? Do we have descriptions of what the board committees are supposed to be doing? And if you don't have those tools in place, it's time to stop trying to move forward until you get them in place and everybody understands what they're supposed to be doing. Bishop Kelly, actually, theirs is called a board of governance, not a board of directors, and it is a policy-making board. I won't go into this today. I'm sure someone else will cover it later, but there are 3 different types of boards. They're very clear on which type of board they are. They're a policy-making board. Are we doing that? You don't step into the staff. Everybody who's been on the other side of this is the executive director, the CEO, and somebody on the board just trying to step into your role and give you advice. Make sure, like we talked about last time, your chain of communication goes board president or board chair to CEO or ED. So that's just one section of the type things this tool can help you evaluate. So Bethany, we'll go to the next one. Board composition and orientation. Bill talked about this. Do we have the skills we need? And I know Idaho Partners for Good does this. How do we help an organization assess what skills you currently have and what skills you need to recruit for? I call it a board composition matrix. Other people call it something else. But do we have a process and a tool in place to identify the skills we need on this board? And are we using that tool when we invite people to be on the board? And if we know somebody's leaving, like I said, succession planning, I need to recruit somebody else who has a skill set like over here. It could be marketing and communications. It could be financial. All right. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for joining us. So that most of this is tied to that overall conversation. Are we recruiting based on what we need? And are we filling board vacancies? Filling board vacancies can be a little tricky. Sometimes your bylaws will say you must, or they say you will, or you shall fill a board vacancy. Sometimes you don't have to. Do you understand what your bylaws say about filling a vacancy? Do you have to fill it? Or can it remain vacant as long as you maintain a quorum? And make sure you know what that says, because people sometimes go into a panic. Oh, we have an empty board position. We need to fill it. Make sure you know what your bylaws say. Do you have to? Is it a must or is it not? Is it a shall? Is it a may? And that last one, we have the skill and knowledge board members need and identify gaps in a board development plan. Part of that is yeah, nice to have a pipeline of potential board members. Yes. And do we know what we need? And in general, do we provide board members with general training on what they're supposed to be doing? Is there an onboarding process? Do they have a job description? Do we review at board meetings or during a annual meeting to review what we're supposed to be doing? Do people understand? So I'll move on to this one. We're on the 3rd tool right now. This one came from Kimbra, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And hers is more of a financial perspective, but she took all of this, the board at a year by month, and turned it into a checklist. So Kimbra, can I bounce over to you and you can tell us a little about this? Because I think this is brilliant.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So this was actually born out of sheer frustration because I came over to nonprofit from corporate, and where everything like this was done for me. And then I discovered, oh, wow, we could lose an awful lot if we didn't have these tools. And so as I'm learning on the fly, I just started putting it in my calendar. And then some brilliant person told me, hey, you know what? You have a board, and this is the kind of stuff they should be tracking. But they were about as clueless as I was. And again, you know what you teach is, you know, what you show is what you teach. So to go with that, I put this calendar together in the time that it came, and my board chair and I discussed this before every meeting. As the agenda was put together, we pulled up that quarter's checklist to see, okay, what do we need to get in front of the board now? What do we need to talk about at this meeting? What do we need them to do in preparation to check this stuff off on time each time? And we just had a little checklist that we carried forward. It included, I can't see this. Can you scroll down just a little bit, Bethany? Is this a slide or is this a?
No, this is,
Okay.
I just took a snapshot.
So every once in a while, you'll see something that's a KPI, because like Maureen was talking, we not only had a board development key performance indicator checklist, but we had one for everything, one of like about 10 different areas of responsibility we felt would make sure that we had good mission visibility and no mission creep. And so we just rotated those in at different times during the year using different people. And there was a committee that was responsible for going to the key stakeholders and doing those assessments and coming back and reporting out to the board. So that's a little bit, maybe a little bit too much, but again, it was a way for me to share the responsibility without having to do it myself and to keep it all in front of us.
I think what you just said about we use this tool to prepare for the board meetings, that's brilliant. Here's the things we're supposed to be reviewing every month. Here's the things we're supposed to review quarterly, and it's all in a spreadsheet-based checklist for you. So we've got Sherry Smith, whose organization just got nonprofit status. A tool like this would be very helpful for her and her board to start planning their year. What are the things we're supposed to be doing on a regular basis?
Yeah, and this
So,
is something that's available as part of the resources through Idaho Partners for Good. So I encourage you to check it out, modify it, make it your own.
yep. So hers is a very comprehensive list, just like the last ones were from McKinsey and then from the New Hampshire organization. So these are very comprehensive tools. Again, you might just grab part of it. And this year, we're going to look at this. If you haven't done this level of a deep dive before, we're going to focus on this year. And that's what we're capable of doing right now. So the next one we're going to go to is what Blossom sent to me that her board uses to do annual assessment. And this is very inclusive. So I just took 2 of the different results of their assessment and just brought them up here. So I picked this one on purpose. How much time does it take me before I'm a board member? I've got a job, I've got kids. How much time does this take to get ready for this board? About the right time. This is a reasonable expectation, because part of what we do has to understand that the board members only have so much time to give us. This is all the time I have. If I overwhelm you, you're probably going to check out. So how much time did I spend in here? It was just about the right time. And then the next one, then I'm going to hand it over to Blossom. She can do a little deeper dive into type things that they look at during their organizational capacity assessment, and then what their board looks at as well. And I really like this one. This is help you with the succession planning. How long can I see myself serving on this board? I'd be willing to do a full term. I'd be willing to go beyond this. I'm not sure I can. And that level of individual self-reflection and honesty is gold. Somebody says, this is all the energy I have right now. I can't see myself staying on this board. Not that I don't love your mission. I can't see myself staying on the board. Or saying, yeah, I have the energy. I have the capacity to keep helping. This is an excellent question for board members to ask themselves. So I am going to toss it over to Blossom so she can give a little more insight about the power of a tool like this and the organizational capacity assessment before we wrap up.
Thank you, Maureen. I think that evaluation is probably one of the priorities that every organization needs to focus a time and attention on. Because when you don't take time to reflect on how you're doing as an organization leadership team, then your organization will have a false lid on it. So if we pay attention to things like how your board is doing in the boardroom, and I will say it isn't easy to create a safe environment unless you're super intentional and have the tools and resources to help you facilitate that boardroom culture, which is super, super important. You don't want a board that's all yes people to the CEO, and you don't want a board that is battling the CEO every step of the way. So you really need to understand what that is. We use this, we've used this for 3 years now. And each year we take the evaluation and we build it into our board retreat so that we can keep improving year over year. This is the second year where people were saying, where we had people who were saying, you know, it's just too much pre-reads for our board meetings. So as a result of Maureen's presentations these last couple of weeks, we have started using an executive summary to add to our pre-reads so that our board members know exactly what to hone in on for the board meeting. That's a new tool that we're trying because of the evaluation we've been using.
Yeah. Would you tell everybody a little bit like your organizational capacity assessment? Because I'm actually working with them in my role as the foundation director for Sunrise Rotary, and they're doing this for another nonprofit, and it's really an extensive evaluation. Extensive, and a lot of it has been focused on helping the board understand their role and be more effective.
Sure. The organizational capacity assessment tool, so the OCAT, is a tool that we use that is based primarily on the McKinsey OCAT. We have tailored it for Idaho. A lot of the OCATs that are out there are a lot more, it's really for more mature, larger organizations. And most of our nonprofits in Idaho have a budget of less than 250,000 and oftentimes volunteers for staff. So we have to, we backed up the OCAT. We have it as a tool that you can use for your organization. We can come in and use it and then generate a report. That isn't a free service, but it is something that's super important so that you have a snapshot and then we can help you build an action plan.
Exactly. Yep. And then the action plan turns itself into an evaluation, an organizational evaluation.
Yeah.
So it all works well. And I showed you 4 different tools because you understand what you're supposed to be doing. You want to do it well, but having a tool to help you do that takes an enormous amount of stress off you. Here's an objective tool. It's very objective. So we're almost getting ready to wrap up, and then we'll capture any questions that came up. But what are the benefits of using an assessment tool? So I just captured one. It's objective. It's I'm going to pull my feelings out of this. I'm serving on this board. Are we effective? And where can we get better? It's objective. What's another benefit of using an assessment tool?
Maureen, you mentioned my favorite, and that is that it's objective. I mean, that really is one of the benefits. It's not a personal or emotional deal. You can look at this, you can hand it off to somebody outside to get their input, and it really is a good jumping off point for growth conversations.
And then go back to Sherry's comment that she's just starting out. She wants to start well. I want to start well and I want to stay good. And I like Maggie's comment, it's measurable. You know, numbers matter. When you set a goal psychologically, you shift your perspective on what's happening here. When you set a goal, you're much more likely to achieve it. When you verbalize it, when you put it in writing, you start tracking it. You create a different mindset. I'm going to do this. And then this gives you a way to turn around and say, how well did we do this? How well did we do it? So I think my next slide is just going to individual directors. Oh gosh, yes. So I actually created a tool for doing a board chair assessment. So the board chair could get feedback from board members because it's a big job being the board chair. You're responsible for so many things. You typically serve on the majority of the committees. So a board member gets some feedback and some pats on the back as well as like, this is something I feel we're still struggling with. So what are the, why is the assessment tool important? So I just gave you some answers. That they want to get better. They can't get better if they don't know what they need to do to get better. They need a way to evaluate their effectiveness. Did I hit 75% of meetings? Did I participate in one fundraising event? Was I an ambassador in the community? Did I invite people to the organization? Somebody put in the chat there, assessments help you remove drama in the boardroom. And drama in the boardroom's something that can distract everybody from what they're supposed to be doing, which is providing capacity and guiding the organization. And that last one becomes risk mitigation. If you're on the board and you have responsibilities and duties to protect the organizational interest, are you doing them? Are we implementing our policies? At least the 2 we're required to have: a whistleblower policy, document retention and destruction. Are we doing that? Are we actually adhering to our bylaws? If we said we were going to meet 6 times a year, are we actually meeting 6 times a year? So adhering to your bylaws, the order of meeting, did we say you could meet virtually, or our bylaws specify that we have to be in person? Are you adhering to your bylaws? Because that's an agreement between you and the IRS on how you're going to operate. And if something happens and somebody wants to sue your board, you want to show that you understood your job was and you were executing according to your existing policies and your bylaws. And the way you know that is when you set the time aside to evaluate whether or not you're doing it. Okay, and I think that just about wraps it up for today. And then we just got, wonderfully, we have about 10 minutes left to take some open questions. So what are your final questions and comments? Or best practices like Bonnie, when we got to chat to Bonnie before we started, she's been doing this for a long time. What is the sweet spot for a good length of time for a board meeting? This question came up last week, and Connie Miller said it was right around 90 minutes. It's right around 90 minutes because there's certain things you need to cover every single time. And they will be just like, what happened? Did we review the financials? Did we review the minutes? That could easily take 45 minutes. So if you don't have 60 to 90 minutes, you probably won't get to generative discussion. You won't get to, here's some things we need to deal with. Here's what's happening at the board committee level. So 60 to 90 minutes. After about 90 minutes, I think I personally find it hard to pay attention, especially because so many of these are virtual now. Yeah, we appreciate having you here, Sherry. I saw Wendy posted a question about dealing with drama in the boardroom. So I'm not going to be dealing with that topic. Do we have anybody coming up, Blossom, who's addressing that?
We do. Connie will be doing that, I think, in August or September. I was just looking to see when that is. But if you're watching our newsletter, then you'll know when it's coming up.
Yeah, but between now and whenever you hear Connie speak, and if you haven't heard Connie talk about the drama triangle, it is well worth your time. It's once again using processes. So make sure you have an agenda, make sure you send the board packet out enough time in advance and people can review it. Make sure you follow your agenda, make sure you do assessments. That level of structure and processes and systems make everything much more objective and scalable. So I'm sorry, Maggie, what was your question?
Just want to make sure, I wonder if there's a way that you can write in your bylaws that new board members or new board chairs need to attend some governance training or this kind of training every year for refreshers.
So that came up last week. And how do you change your bylaws? And usually your bylaws right towards the end will say these bylaws can be changed by a vote of the board at any regularly scheduled board meeting or with a special meeting. And that wouldn't be a significant change to your bylaws. You're not changing the mission, you're not changing the vision, you're not increasing or decreasing your number of approved committees. That's a small change. So you could vote that in. Another place you could do it is just becomes part of your standing operating procedure. So when I said last week, like, okay, set some board level goals. And you say every year, fourth quarter, we have a board retreat and we do onboarding for the people who are coming in next quarter. And it just becomes a part of your board level plan every year that we do this.
That makes sense.
I'm going to go ahead and launch our final poll here.
Okay.
Just gives us some feedback of what you've learned in this session. And I'll go ahead and do my outro, and then if there's other questions, we can wrap them up. Thank you for joining us today. The Nonprofit Success Lab was brought to you by the Idaho Partners for Good, social enterprise Thrive Together Consulting. Thrive Together has 3 buckets of consulting services. We offer operations, leadership, and strategy. The Thrive Together consulting services are designed with your team to enhance efficiency, streamline processes, and optimize resource allocation. We craft tailored solutions with your team members from across the organization to ensure that your operations align seamlessly with your overall goals. If you have a need for a consultant, please contact us. If you know of a company, agency, or organization that uses consultants, we would love an introduction. When your business takes time to build strategies that work, you can then spend more time in the business and less time fighting fires. And then a percentage of all the consulting fees help fund the work of Idaho Partners for Good with nonprofits. Next up, we return to our monthly cadence for the Nonprofit Success Lab, which is the second Thursday of the month from 9:30 to 10:30. AM. Our next expert is Kimbra Shaw. She's on here today, and she will be presenting on the differences between strategic and tactical planning.
Ooh.
It will focus on getting clarity to set effective metrics and role definitions. If you benefited from today's workshop, then spread the word, invite other leaders, especially those that sit on boards. And I'll make sure to put that YouTube link here in the chat, which is where today's recording will live. And then also the last 3 prior sessions for Maureen's series here.
Okay. And thanks to everybody for joining, and thanks for all the conversation and the good ideas. These weekly sessions can be so powerful. Like Devin's group, his board is going to start watching some of these for board training. Okay. And thanks for hosting, Bethany. You do a great job.
Happy to do it.
Okay. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
Mm.